Dust bath, dust up. As he slept, Chick had a nightmare that he was lost somewhere and being chased by a giant snake. In his dream, Chick was trying to run to get away, but he could only run in slow motion. Then suddenly, he found himself on the bank of Grymme Creek, and on the other side was Walter waving at him. Chick saw the snake that was chasing him was now slithering along the other bank, heading towards Walter. Chick tried to yell for his father to look out, but when he opened his beak, no sound came out. Desperate, Chick jumped into the water to swim to the other side, but even in his nightmare, he was a poor swimmer. Just when it looked as if he was going to drown, Chick woke with a start. He looked around in a panic and saw his mother getting breakfast ready. He calmed down a bit and asked, "Where's Dad?" As June sat there plucking the seed off some grass head, she replied, "He said he had some things to take care of and he'll be back soon." Chick asked, "Is he okay?" June looked up from her chore and said, "Who, your father?" "Yeah," said Chick. "Is Dad okay?" "He was when he went out," said June. "Are you okay, Chick?" "Yeah," said Chick as he rubbed his head. "I just had a nightmare and it was scary." "Do you want to talk about it?" asked his mother. Chick shook his head. "Well, come on and have your breakfast," she said, "and when you're finished I want you to go take a dust bath. We need to look our best for the Council of Aunties." June laid out Chick's breakfast, and like all mothers, fussed and clucked to encourage him to eat while taking a few bites for herself. When Chick was finished, he went outside to take his dust bath. As he was going around the corner of the coop, he saw Burney loitering there. Burney never hung around the coop unless he was wanting to bully someone. He stood there clicking his crooked little beak, trying his best to look menacing. With him were a couple of thuggish-looking cockerels. They were his older cousins, Fugo and Clemp. They had small combs that sprouted atop their pointed heads like tiny spikes. Their heads and necks were covered with coarse chick down similar to Burney's. Their wings and bodies were a mix of brown juvenile feathers and with more coarse chick down. They had stumpy tail feathers that were barely visible as they poked out of the tuft of down that was on their rumps. They stood there on awkwardly large feet that were actually seemed to be too big for them, and the rest of the body was having trouble catching up. Fugo and Clemp weren't exactly the sharpest thorns on the bush, but what they lacked in intelligence, they more than made up for it in being tough. They stood there behind Burney, looking like a pair of clumsy, immature raptors ready to strike as soon as something caught their eye. Burney was angry at having been humiliated by Chick the other day. He wanted to get even, but he didn't want to do it alone because Chick lacked the one thing that all bullies needed to make him a victim, and that was fear. As a bully, Burney knew that if someone was afraid, they were less likely to hit back when you hit them. Even though Chick was smaller and younger than Burney, he wasn't afraid of him. Chick just walked right past Burney and his cousins without so much as a sideways glance. This made Burney even more angry. It was one thing for Chick not to be afraid of him, but to totally ignore him was even a worse insult. Chick stepped into the dust bath and scratched out a depression to roll in. Burney swaggered to the edge of the dust bath, and he stood there sneering with his cousins behind him and waited for Chick to say something. Chick said nothing. He just rolled around in the dust bath. Burney started to feel nervous, and he looked for some indication from Chick that he was intimidated or at least ready to fight. His plan was if Chick was intimidated, then he would go ahead and weigh in on him. If he was ready to fight, then he would let his cousins have at him. Burney thought that Fugo and Clemp could work him over until he was no longer a threat, and then he would finish him off. Chick, however, was giving no indication that he wanted to fight or that he was intimidated. Finally, his cousin Fugo leaned over to Burney and asked, "We gonna do this or what?" Then Clemp leaned down and chimed in, "Yeah, come on, cousin, you promised us a fight." Annoyed, Burney peeped. "Keep your tail feathers on, I'm sizing the situation up." Finally, Burney screwed up his nerve and said, "What you doing, Peep baby?" Chick did not respond. He continued to roll around in the dust. Burney stood there watching and waiting for Chick to make a move. Then suddenly, Chick flipped over and kicked his legs up in the air. Startled and thinking Chick was making a move, Burney jumped back and bumped into his cousins. Chick wasn't making a move. He was just working on getting his back dusted, or remembering that his mother said in order for the dust to do him any good, he had to get it all over. Burney's cousins started to snicker, but stifled as soon as Burney shot them an angry look. They gave Burney a lot of leeway, not so much because he was all that tough, but because of who his mother was. Even two slow-thinking chicks like Fugo and Clemp were smart enough to know that to stay off Aunt Hasidia's bad side, you didn't do anything to hurt her little boy. Burney turned back to Chick and said, "Hey, you dumb yoker, I'm talking to you." Still, Chick didn't respond. He just continued to roll around in the dust. Burney stuck out his beak and stepped into the dust bath. When he did, Burney stopped rolling, thinking surely Chick was making a move. Burney froze. Seeing that Chick was just lying there, he peeped. "Your dad is a dirty traitor, a dirty no-good traitor, and a thief." Chick, lying in the dust, just looked at Burney. Burney glared at Chick, thinking, or at least hoping, that his blank expression was fear. Burney cautiously moved closer and chirped, "Yeah, your dad's a no-good traitor, thief, and a mouse lover. He stole corn and gave it to them filthy field mice, and now he's going to get kicked off the homestead. What do you think of that, Pete baby?" Chick continued to lie there, staring at Burney. Having waited long enough, Burney suddenly jumped at Chick, and just as he did, Chick flipped and rolled, kicking up a cloud of dust in Burney's face. Burney staggered backwards, and Chick flew up and kicked him in the stomach. Burney fell back, but quickly recovered and charged at Chick. The two kicked and pecked furiously at each other. Tiny feathers and Chick down flew as they fought. Seeing this wasn't going to be an easy victory, Burney yelled out to his cousin, "Don't just stand there, fight!" Fugo and Clemp looked at each other and then shrugged and started to fight one another. Fugo and Clemp loved to fight. It was their most favorite thing to do, and they weren't particular about who they fought. More often than not, they just fought each other just to keep in practice. Seeing what they were doing, Burney broke away and scrambled over to his cousins, yelling, "Stop! Stop, you idiots!" It took a lot of yelling and feather pulling, but eventually Burney got Fugo and Clemp to stop fighting, but not after getting a few supposedly accidental blows from his two cousins. "What's the matter with you two?" yeeped Burney angrily. Blinking stupidly at Burney, Fugo Clemp replied, "You said fight." "Yeah, fight," echoed Clemp. "Not each other," said Burney. "I meant him," meaning Chick. "But you're fighting him," said Clemp. "So?" peeped Burney. "Well, it's no fun to fight 2-on-1, said Fugo. "Yeah, no fun at all," said Clemp. "What do you mean, no fun?" blurted Burney. "Fugo, I've seen you take 2 cockerels at once, and Clemp, I've seen you take on 3. "Well, that's different," said Fugo. "Yeah, different," said Clemp. "How?" asked Burney. Fugo explained. "If one of us take on 2 or 3, that just means the fight lasts longer, and me and Clemp like that, don't we, Clemp?" "Sure do," said Clemp. "But if me and Clemp gang up 2-on-1, that's not a fight, is it, Clemp?" "Nope," said Clemp. "No fight at all." Besides, said Fugo, where's the fun if the other fella can't hit back? As bullies go, Fugo and Clemp were something of an oddity. They were bullies governed by a set of rules. It was something like a code of ethics that had been pecked into their heads by an equally combative mother. Seeing they were at a philosophical impasse, Burney said, then why don't one of you have a go at Chick to see if he will hit you back? Fugo and Clemp looked at Chick, who stood there panting. He was bruised and missing some feathers, and Burney didn't look any better. He was also missing a few feathers, plus a few bonus lumps from his cousins. Oh, I don't know, said Clemp. He looks kind of beat up already. Why don't you just finish him off? Burney fiercely yeeped, come on and just do it. Nah, said Fugo, this ain't no fun. Yeah, no fun at all, said Clemp. Then he turned to Burney and said, you said if we came with you there was going to be a fight, but this ain't no fight. Sure it is, said Burney. He's got plenty of fight left in him. Fugo looked at Chick and asked, hey kid, you want to fight or what? Chick defiantly stuck his beak out and assumed the attack stance. There you go, said Burney gleefully. He's challenged you. Oh, still, said Fugo reluctantly. Hardly seems worth it. One hit and he'd be done. Clemp shook his head and said, yeah, it's just not right to hit someone who won't be able to hit you back after you hit 'em. That's a violation of fight rule number 1. What are you talking about, yeeped Burney. To give a punch, you gotta take a punch, said Clemp. Well, that's stupid. Where'd you get a stupid rule like that? Clemp gave Burney a severe look and said, or ma. Fugo took a step towards Burney and asked menacingly, are you disrespecting our ma? 'Cause if you are, me and Clemp got a problem with that. Burney knew that there were some lines that even he shouldn't cross, and one of them was never to say anything bad about Fugo and Clemp's mother, because if he did, not even a threat of a reprisal from Aunt Alcidia could save him. Backing away, Burney raised both wings and quickly yeeped, no, not at all, and by stupid and dumb, I mean it would be stupid and dumb not to follow that rule. Ma don't mind us fighting, said Clemp, just so long as we go by the rules. Before Clemp could respond, someone yelled, what's going on here? The two big cockerels and Burney jumped. They all expected to see an angry medhen or something worse, someone's angry mother standing there. But what they saw was even worse than both of those things. It was a very irritated Quinny. I asked you a question, she said sternly, and don't make me ask it again. Even though Quinny was small, even smaller than Chick, what she lacked in size she more than made up for with attitude. Her anger gave her the effect of being much larger than she actually was. No one wanted to answer, and when Quinny looked at Chick, she became furious. She stuck her beak up at Fugo and asked, are you responsible for this? Fugo stared back wide-eyed and shook his head no. Quinny then jerked around and stuck her beak up at Clemp. Did you do this? She demanded. Clemp also shook his head no. Then who? Demanded Quinny, and her voice becoming even louder and more angry. Fugo and Clemp looked at each other, and then they both sheepishly pointed to Burney. Quinny turned her harsh gaze to Burney. Placing her wings on her hips, she said, Burney Malcolm, I should have known. But out, Quinny, peeped Burney peevishly. This is guy stuff and doesn't concern you. Quinny's eyes narrowed and the anger in her voice widened, making her appear even bigger. What did you say? Trying to hang on to his quickly failing courage, Burney stammered, I said, butt out. That's what I thought you said, replied Quinny menacingly. She took a step closer to Burney and sticking out her beak, she said, "Make me." Startled, Burney said, "What?" "You heard me," she said fiercely. "I said, make me." Burney anxiously edged away from Quinny and towards his cousin. "Are we going to let her talk to us like this?" he asked, trying his best not to sound intimidated. Fugo and Clemp looked at each other, and then they looked at Burney. "She ain't talking to us," said Clemp. "She's talking to you," said Fugo. And then he gave Burney a little shove. "We don't want no part of this," said Clemp. "Oh, come on, guys," peeped Burney. "You're not afraid of a little girl, are you?" "No, we ain't," said Fugo, "but you remember Ma's #1 rule?" "You mean to give a punch, you have to take a punch," said Burney. "Yep," said Fugo. "Now you need to know Ma's #2 fight rule." "Which is?" "Never hit a girl," said Fugo. Quinny walked over and stuck her beak up in Burney's face and just stood there glaring at him. Then, without warning, she pecked Burney hard, right between the eyes. Burney yeeped and staggered backwards. Rubbing where he had been hit, he looked up at his cousins and asked, "What does your ma say if the girl hits you first?" Fugo looked at Quinny and said, "In her case, we'd have to refer to Ma's #3 rule, which is, never hit anyone that is less than half your size," replied Fugo, indicating Quinny's stature. "Even if she hits you first," said Clemp. "Yeah, and especially if she's a girl," added Fugo. All three of them turned to look at Quinny, standing there defiantly with her downy wings on her fuzzy hips, and then Fugo and Clemp turned to leave. As they did, Burney peeped. "Where are you guys going?" Fugo turned and said, "Well, when you said we needed to come with you for a fight, we didn't bargain on this." Burney pleaded, "Well, you can't leave now." "Got to," said Clemp, "'cause of Ma's fight rule #4. "Which is?" asked Burney. "Don't fight other people's fights. You own your own, cousin. There's nothing we can do for you, because not only is she a girl and smaller, but she's also Quinny Oddwaddle. We all know about her, don't we, Fugo?" "Sure do," said Fugo. "She's a whole lot of trouble rolled up in one little blonde, downy bundle." Smiling coyly, Quinny said, "You boys say the nicest things. Tell your mama I said hi when you see her." Fugo and Clemp both nodded and tipped their wings to Quinny as they left. Alone now, Burney turned to face Quinny, who stood there with her wings on her hips, tapping her foot. Burney, fidgeting anxiously, peeped. "I know this looks bad, Quinny, but you left me no choice." "Oh, and just how do you figure that?" asked Quinny. "Because you're my girl," peeped Burney loudly, "and it don't look right you being all chummy with him." Quinny scowled and then stuck her beak up in Burney's face. Thinking he was going to get pecked again, Burney ducked, and instead Quinny declared, "I'm no one's girl." "Well, yes, you are," said Burney as he flinched. "Or at least you will be. Our mothers are working out the details, and once they do, you and I will be paired and pledged to nest together as soon as we're old enough." In typical Quinny melodramatic fashion, Quinny threw up her wings and declared, "I never agreed to such an arrangement. The thought of being given to a cockerel to nest with as soon as I'm old enough is just so unromantic, and I can only nest with someone I truly love." "But I thought you loved me," peeped Burney. Seeing the sad look in Burney's eyes, Quinny softened a bit and said, "Oh, I do love you, Burney." "Do you?" asked Burney hopefully. "Well, I do," said Quinny, "but not in that way. I love you as a friend." Disappointed, Burney asked, "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," said Quinny, "while I enjoy spending time with you, I'm not interested in setting up a nest with you, but don't feel bad. I don't want to set up a nest with anyone." Holding back angry tears, Burney asked, "Well, then what about Chick?" Quinny repeated indignantly, "Well, what about Chick?" "I bet you'd nest with him," said Burney. Annoyed Quinny peeped. "Why are we even having this conversation, Burney? I told you I'm way too young to be thinking about nesting with anybody." "Well, you're never too young to start thinking about your future," said Burney. "At some point, you're going to be old enough to start laying eggs, and you should be thinking about who you want their father to be." "Who says I do?" peeped Quinny angrily. "Maybe I don't want to nest, and maybe I don't want to lay eggs." "Now you're being ridiculous," said Burney. "All hens lay eggs. It's nature's way." "So what?" peeped Quinny angrily. "I don't exactly need a rooster to lay eggs." Burney gasped. "Quinny, don't talk like that. If you don't have a rooster, then what?" said Quinny sharply. Burney stammered. Your eggs." Quinny blurted, "What about my eggs?" Embarrassed, Burney got very red around the beak and whispered, "They won't be fertile." "Oh, for corn's sake," peeped Quinny. "Who cares if I lay fertile eggs or not?" Burney stammered, but. Then he closed his eyes and swallowed hard. "That wouldn't be proper," he said quietly. You don't want to be that kind of hen, do you?" "And what kind of hen is that, Burney?" asked Quinny sharply. "Quinny, please," peeped Burney. "Don't make me say it." Quinny rolled her eyes and peeped. "Burney, you are such a prude. It is at times like this that you make it very hard for me to be your friend." Burney frowned and said, "I suppose you'd rather be friends with Chick." Chick stood there listening. Some of it he understood, like being friends, but this whole business of nesting and fertile or infertile eggs was way over his head. He thought that the first chance he got, he'd ask Peck about some of it. Hopefully, Peck would be able to explain it to him. "I'm friends with him," said Quinny, "and I'm friends with you too. Isn't that enough?" "Well, for now, I suppose," said Burney. "But sooner or later you'll have to choose him or me." Quinny then put her wing on Burney's shoulder and as sincerely as she could said, "Burney, I like you, I really do, but I like Chick too. Why can't I be friends with both of you?" "You do realize his father is a traitor and a thief," said Burney. "Alleged traitor and thief," said Peck. No one noticed that Peck had walked up and was standing at the edge of the dust bath. The allegations against Chick's father have yet to be proven. That is why his family is to appear before the Council of Aunties. Burney contemptuously replied, "Oh, a mere formality. The evidence against him is overwhelming." "There is also evidence that speaks to his innocence," said Chick. "And what would a little yoker like you know about evidence for guilt or innocence?" "Quite a bit, actually," said Peck as he walked over to Chick. He leaned in and said, "I need to talk to you," and then he cast an anxious glance towards Burney and added, "In private?" Burney snorted. "You two little pea-babies go ahead and have your little private chat. I have better things to do." "I'm sure you do, pasty butt," said Chick. "You don't want to be late for your butt-wiping lessons." Burney made a move to hit Chick, but Quinny stopped him. "Burney, don't," she said. "Chick has enough problems without you adding to them." Burney curtly nodded his head and with some difficulty composed himself. "You are a compassionate pullet," he said. "That's one of the many things I love about you. All right. If you want to be friends with this dumb yoker, go ahead. But know this, you can't be friends with everyone, and sooner or later you'll have to choose." He then turned to Chick and said, "You two better watch yourself, because this isn't over," and with that Burney left. Peck shook his head and said, "First a play date with Burney, and now Mom wants to pair you off with him. Now that's moving fast even for you, Quinny." Enjoying having a little fun at Quinny's expense, Chick chimed in, "Yeah, it's bad enough your mom made you go play with him, but pairing you with him, wouldn't that be considered chick abuse?" "Oh, you two stopped," peeped Quinny angrily. "I'm not in the mood. This is way too much drama for me." "Too much drama," peeped Chick. "Quinny, you are the quintessential drama pullet. You have more drama in your little toe than most grown chickens have in their whole body." Quinny frowned and said, "I'm going to ignore that remark, except to say that Chick is my friend and I'm here to support him during this difficult time." "I appreciate that, Quinny," said Chick, "but right now I'm more worried about you." Quinny, smiling demurely, said, "Oh, how sweet, but why on earth would you worry about me?" Trying hard not to laugh, Chick replied, "Because your mom is trying to marry you off to Burney. That's way worse than anything that's going to happen to me today. I'd rather go live in the deep brush with a bunch of wild porcupines than be married to Burney." "You're such a bore," peeped Quinny crossly. "Burney's not as bad as that, once you get to know him." "Oh, I bet he's quite the charmer," said Chick wryly. "I'll admit he's not perfect," said Quinny, "but—" "Oh, I'd say he's perfect, all right," said Pick. "He's a perfect bully, and I've got the lumps to prove it." "He's only the way he is because he's trying to please his mother," said Quinny. "It's not easy growing up with an overly critical mother who can never be satisfied." "Oh, no, I wouldn't know anything about that," said Peck sarcastically, "because we all know how tolerant our own mother is." "Well, mother can be critical," said Quinny sharply, "but at least she's never been accused of eating her own young." "You know, that is just a rumor," said Walter. Walter had also this then came strolling up unnoticed while the chicks were talking. "Oh, hello, Mr. Penfeather," said Quinny, who got a little red around the beak at being overheard. "I was just joking." "Oh, you were now," said Walter. "Still, you shouldn't be saying hurtful things about others, because everyone has feelings, and that includes Aunt Acedia." Then Walter saw the state the Chick was in and balked. "Good grief, boy, what happened to you?" "Oh, nothing," said Chick as he tried to smooth out his feathers. "Nothing," said Walter skeptically. "Well, I hope the other fellow had nothing happen to him as well." Immediately Quinny blubbered, "Oh, Mr. Penfeather, please don't be mad at Chick. It wasn't his fault." "Oh, not his fault," said Walter. "Then whose fault was it?" "Oh, mine, I'm afraid," said Quinny theatrically. "You see, my mother's been after me for some time to keep company with Burney Malcolm, so I have, just to please her, mind you, since Chick and I are such good friends. Burney got the wrong idea. I tried to set him straight, but he wouldn't listen. He got ever so jealous and wanted to fight Chick for me." Intrigued, Walter clucked. "Is that a fact?" Quinny nodded emphatically and peeped. "Yes, sir. And when I heard what was happening, I came as quickly as I could and made him stop, but not before he and Chick had got into it." "Oh, Mr. Penfeather, I am so very sorry." Then Quinny dissolved into tears. As she did, Peck leaned over to Chick and whispered, "Behold, Her Majesty the Queen of all things melodramatic." Still, this performance is a bit over the top even for her. Chick whispered back, "Well, who cares as long as it keeps me out of trouble?" Walter tried to comfort Quinny and said, There, Quinny, I'm not mad. Chick isn't in trouble. I'm glad you're his friend." With teary eyes, Quinny looked up and sniffed. Really, you're not angry, you promise?" Smiling, Walter said, "No, of course not." Quinny sniffed and with a quavering voice replied, "Well, if you really aren't." Walter chuckle-clucked and patted her on the head. "Oh, I promise, and I'm really not," he said. I always say you can never have too many friends, and I'm glad you're Chick's. His mother will be, too. Oh, speaking of which, come on, boy. We need to get you cleaned up, because if she sees you like this, she'll pop her wattles." "It's too late for that," said Peck, pointing behind Walter. Walter slowly turned around to see a very annoyed June Penfeather standing there glaring at them. Immediately, Quinny launched into another blubbering explanation in the hopes of diffusing June's anger. Unfortunately, she quickly found out that June was not as easily persuaded as Walter. In fact, June was probably one of the few hens who were immune to Quinny's melodramatics. Quinny realized this when she caught June's angry gaze and abruptly stopped in mid-blubber. She then immediately said, I better go. I think I hear my mother calling me. She then gave Chick a little peck on the cheek and then scampered off. June turned her gaze to Chick, who knew better than to say anything. June then turned to Walter and asked, "Do I even want to know what happened?" "Probably not," said Walter. June wearily rubbed her eyes and said, "Walter, we are supposed to go to the Galileo Art cabin to appear before the Council of Aunties. We need to be there now to speak with our advocate before we get to the council." Chick looked at Peck, who managed to go unnoticed by Walter or June. Peck was almost as good as a field mouse at making himself unnoticeable. "Did you manage to find us a rule fair or someone to help us?" asked Chick. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," said Peck. "It's good news and bad news. The bad news is I asked around, and as far as I could tell, there are no rule fairs and haven't been any rule fairs on the Homestead for quite some time." "What do you think Auntie City got rid of them?" said Chick. "Doubtfully," said Peck. "The only ones who remember there being rule fairs were some of the really older hens, and that was when they were about our age. So that would be way before Aunt Acidia's time." "So what do you think happened to him?" asked Chick. Peck shook his head. "No one seems to know. I imagine since they fell out of favor with the Council of Andes, being a rule fair became something of an unpopular job. So when the old rule fairs retired or passed away, there was nobody that took their place." "So who's going to help my family plead the case before the Council of Aunties?" "Well, that's the good news," said Peck. "Since I couldn't find anyone who was capable or willing to go up against Aunt Acidia, I went to speak with Viona Spudfoot." "Viona Spudfoot?" said Chick. Peck replied enthusiastically, "Yeah, she may not be a rule fair, but she seems to have a good understanding of the rights of the coop, and since no one else wants to help..." "Well, what did she say when you asked her?" asked Chick. Peck leaned in as if they were in danger of being overheard and quietly peeped. "She gave me a wink and tapped the side of her beak with the tip of her wing." "What's that supposed to mean?" asked Chick. Peck rolled his eyes and said, "Well, isn't it obvious?" "Not to me," said Chick. Peck whispered, "Viona is going to advocate for your family." "Are you sure?" asked Chick. "Because it doesn't sound like she actually said she'd do it." "Positive," said Peck. "I know she's being cagey, but that's probably because she has a plan." Chick thought for a moment and said, "Well, I guess that does make sense. She does go on about knowing everyone's rights. She's probably being tight-beaked about it because of Aunt Acidia. She told me if the old hen hag came for her, she wouldn't go quietly." Peck's eyes went wide with concern. Maybe Aunt Acidia suspects something and is going to try and stop it. Before Chick could respond, Walter cut their conversation short. "Well, not to worry, dears," he said to June with anxious, obligingly cheerfulness. "I'll take Chick to the well and get him cleaned up a bit, and that way you go on to the cabin and let them know that we are coming. We'll meet you there." "I guess that'll have to do," said June testily. She then looked at Chick and said, "Chick, you go with your father and get cleaned up and stay with him. I don't want none of this wandering off to explore. Do you understand? It's very important that nothing else goes wrong today." Chick nodded. June then turned to her husband and said, "And Walter, for corn's sake, try not to lose him this time." "Oh, no problem, dear," said Walter. "Chick, you heard your mother. Let's go." Peck, who was still standing there being unnoticed, tagged along. Walter, Chick, and Peck arrived at the well in the middle of the homestead. The well was less a well and more of a hole that had been dug by someone who intended it to be a well but for some reason never finished it. Being spring-fed, the well/hole had overflowed to form a pool several feet in diameter, and in and around the pool were these flat stones that were most likely intended to be part of the well but were now used by the chickens as convenient stepping stones. Since chickens don't swim, they are very cautious around large, deep bodies of water, and the well was no exception. In general, the homestead chickens felt safe as long as they kept to the shallow edge. Walter, with the two chicks, gingerly stepped along the flat stones as they made their way to the shallowest end of the pool. Chick, unlike other chickens, really didn't have much of a fear of the water, but Walter's fear of the water was very extreme even by chicken standards. He allowed Chick to barely get in the water, which didn't even cover his feet. "There you go, boy," he said cheerfully. "Now wash up." Chick looked up at his dad and said, "Dad, this isn't deep enough." "Sure it is, son," replied Walter. "Now go on, wash up, and don't forget to get behind your earlobes." "Mr. Pinfeather," said Peck as he tugged on one of Walter's tail feathers. "What?" Walter said as he turned around. "Oh, Peck, didn't see you there. Where'd you come from?" "I followed you here," said Peck. "Oh, did you now?" said Walter. Peck replied, "I think if Chick moves in a little further, it'll be okay," said Peck. "Oh, I don't know," said Walter. "You can't be too careful around here. This well can be dangerous." Chick peeped at Walter. "Dad, it's mostly mud here. I gotta move in a little deeper." Walter balked. "Oh, no, that's too dangerous. What if you step in a hole or fall off the edge?" Frustrated, Chick peeped. "If the water is clear, Dad, and I can see the bottom, and there are no holes or steep edges." Peck tugged on Walter's tail feathers again and said, "Mr. Pinfeather, why don't you get in the water with Chick? That way you can be sure he'll be okay." "Oh, I suppose I could," said Walter anxiously. "Son, you sure you need more water?" Annoyed, Chick peeped. "Dad!" All right, I'm coming," said Walter as he nervously stepped into the water. Taking Chick by the wing, they slowly moved in until the water was not quite up to Chick's knees. Whoa, squawked Walter. "That right there's plenty enough. Oh, it's cold. We have to be careful because you could get a cramp and drown." Chick thought that was unlikely. Even though the water was cold, he was confident he could avoid drowning in less than 2 inches of water. As Walter helped Chick wash, he seemed to get a little bit more comfortable. "Oh, well, this isn't too bad," he said. "See, son, I told you there's nothing to worry about, nothing at all." Chick just rolled his eyes and didn't say anything. Walter helped Chick wash off the bit of dirt and bits of dry blood and smoothed out his feathers, and when they had finished, Chick stepped onto a flat rock. The warm sun felt good after his cold bath. Chick fluffed out his feathers and gave himself a vigorous shaking. "Ah, good as new," said Walter happily as he looked at Chick. "Well, let's not keep the Council of Aunties waiting." As they stepped back to cross the stones, Chick said, "Dad, I want to ask you something." "What's that?" said Walter as he helped Chick and Peck step off a flat stone. "Do you think the Aunties will make you leave the homestead?" "Why would they?" asked Walter as they started up to the path that led to the cabin. Annoyed at his father for not taking this more seriously, he said, "Because they say you stole corn and gave it to the field mice. And don't say it was just all a misunderstanding. You've said that before." Walter stopped and hung his head. He sighed deeply and turned to Chick and said, "I won't lie to you, son. It could happen, but there's a chance it might not." Walter paused and, at a poor attempt to sound optimistic, said, "So let's not borrow trouble and keep a good thought." "Well, I will, Dad," said Chick, "but if you do have to go in the deep brush, I want to go with you." Walter felt a catch in his throat. "Well, that's very commendable, son, but if I go, mind you, I don't think I'll have to, and you come with me, then who will look after your mother?" Walter bent down and placed his wings on Chick's shoulders and said, with uncharacteristic seriousness, "Son, the deep brush is a very dangerous place, and I don't even want to think about any of us going there." "But, Dad," said Chick, "Dorman's told me you have loads of friends in the deep brush. He even said you were on good terms with a coyote. So that means if we went, we'd be okay, right?" Walter shook his head and said, "Not necessarily. First off, the deal with the coyote is not what you think. I helped him out once, and that's not to say that if he saw me again, he wouldn't eat me or anyone who was with me. Secondly, most of the others that I'm on good terms with are smaller creatures that couldn't defend themselves against a predator, let alone me or my family. So my answer is no. If I get exiled, you and your mother cannot come with me." Chick started to object, but Walter cut him off. "Now don't argue with me, Chick. I'm your father, and you'll do as I say." Chick was stunned. He had never heard his father speak so forcefully like this with anyone, let alone him. Walter was always so happy and amiable. Walter sat down next to Chick and wrapped his wings around him. "Chick, I love you and your mother so much. You know that, don't you?" Chick tearfully nodded his head. Walter said, "Good. Now, your mother and I have discussed this, and if heaven forbid the worst happens and I have to leave, she is going to stay here at the homestead, which means she is going to need someone to take care of her, and that is why you will have to stay. I have no doubt that you could handle yourself in the deep brush, but your mother couldn't. So, you understand why you have to stay, don't you?" Chick, sniffing, reluctantly replied, "I suppose." Walter, smiling, said, "Good. I knew I could count on you, son." Walter then leaned in close to Chick and whispered, "But I'm not gone yet." He then stood up and, sounding more like his old optimistic self, said, "And I won't go without a fight. You'll see, boy, once I get in there and tell my side of the story, everything will be all right. So come on, we don't want to keep the aunties waiting." Not knowing what else to say, Chick fell in behind Walter. Peck, not saying anything, and still not really being noticed, fell in behind Chick, and the three of them began making their way to the cabin.